Story 1. When I was working at a Greek bar, one of the tourists broke into my apartment and watched me sleep. When I woke up and asked her to leave, she said, "Wow, you were really grumpy when you were tired." Story 2. My elderly neighbor was saying my name. I sat straight up and started looking around the house but did not find anything. The next day, I found out she had died the night before. I think she wanted to say goodbye. Story 3. A smoke alarm sounded, and black smoke was pouring across the ceiling of the bedroom. Story 4. A nurse removing a catheter from my penis after surgery. I was not expecting that. Story 5. I was in the hospital a long time ago, probably around 2012 or 2013. I was sleeping, and when my environment is unfamiliar, I am a light sleeper. I had a roommate in this hospital I stayed in, and she was nothing short of nuts. I was scared awake by her standing over me naked and whispering in tongues right into my ear. It was like something out of a horror film. I tried to stay still so as not to frighten her further, but she drooled in my ear, and I jumped from the chill. Right after that, she started screaming. Luckily, staff were walking by and managed to calm her down. The next day, I got to go home, thankfully. It has stuck with me all these years as probably the scariest experience I've had. Story 6. Hypnagogic hallucinations with sleep paralysis are a very eerie way to wake up. It is unsettling when your eyes are open but you cannot move at all. There is a shadowy, indistinct presence at the foot of your bed, and then it starts screaming. It is more intense than a strong espresso. Story 7. I woke up slumped over my steering wheel. It turned out I had my first ever seizure while driving. The doctors discovered a small lesion on my brain that had bled and removed the lesion. I made a full recovery. Story 8. I woke up one morning and could not remember my name. There were no drugs involved, and I did not panic because I still remembered who I was. I just could not remember my name. I was replaying a conversation I had where someone used my name to address me, and it came back. Definitely a weird feeling, though. It only happened that one time. Story 9. Just falling asleep on my couch at about 3 a.m., and all of a sudden, the Alexa in my kitchen went off at full volume, saying, "Now playing Bob Marley," and began to play a song. Scared me a lot. I lived alone with no pets at the time. Story 10. I had just moved in with my now ex-partner. I was in bed, and he was in the next room taking a shower. We had just smoked, so the porch light was still on for our balcony deck. But the door was locked and the lights in the bedroom were off. I had just closed my eyes to go to sleep when I heard a rustling sound from outside. I heard a thud and turned over to see a black shadow of a figure starting off distant and very blurry. As they came closer, the shadow became darker and more defined. I heard the lock on the door click, and a drunk girl stumbled through the curtains, tripped, and landed halfway in bed with me. The locking mechanism was broken, and we didn't know. It was honestly like a campy movie, and if I had seen that in a movie, I would have thought it was so unrealistic. Story 11. Woken up to my tortoiseshell cat with her big eyes level with the side of the mattress just staring at me. I love her, but she genuinely freaks me out sometimes. She does this a lot, and it is unsettling every time. Being awake in the night and suddenly realizing is a different story. That was the time I was up at 2 a.m. playing The Sims and figured out someone had broken in and was actively inside my house. Story 12. My partner of 9 years. We had just started sleeping in the same bed together when I was woken up by him on top of me, shaking me awake and screaming, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Then he patted my head as if inspecting me and said, "You're okay," in a soothing voice. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. It turns out he hallucinates sometimes if he is woken up, almost like sleep paralysis. I had shifted to my side, and he, in his half-sleep state, hallucinated that I rested my head on a giant cactus with huge spikes and saw one go into my head. So it was kind of sweet that he cared, but in that moment it was terrifying. Now, when he jolts up in bed screaming, I hold his arm to ground him and say, "You're just seeing things. It's not real." Then we both go back to sleep. Usually he sees bees. Story 13. Earlier this summer, I had to urinate in the middle of the night. When I attempted to wash my hands afterward, there was a hideous centipede or millipede in the sink. I could not deal with it. I rushed back into my bedroom and slammed the door. The next morning it was gone. But where? Story 14. I thought I was dreaming. I saw a man standing over me, young, in his 20s, wearing a white hoodie. He kind of looked like Eminem. I woke up in the morning to find my house robbed, car keys and car gone, jewelry and laptop missing. They robbed 3 people on my street that early morning. Story 15. I thought a strand from my blanket was on my foot, so I gently tried to flick it off. Unfortunately, it was a wolf spider. Story 16. My mom off her medication, standing over me grinning on Christmas morning. It's Christmas. Story 17. My wife and I had to stay with her mother for a while, and we slept on the couch in the living room. Every morning for the first month, she would come downstairs, sit in a chair, and wait for us to wake up. Sometimes she was on her phone, but other times she was just sitting there watching us. We would wake up and she would just be there, as if it was totally normal to watch people sleep. It still creeps me out to think about it. Story 18. After losing my keys, I woke up to a man standing over me, breathing heavily, when I was only 19 in my first apartment. Thank goodness I froze because when I barely moved, he breathed heavily and leaned so close to my face I could feel his breath on me. When he finally left, I called 911. The apartment manager knew who it was right away because of his pacing back and forth. Nothing ever happened to him. I moved out. Story 19. I woke up in my own bed with no recollection of how I ended up there. It was not even conceivable for me to have gotten home from another state, right before using ride-sharing services. I did not have a car. I had fallen asleep on my friend's couch. To this day, my friends and I wonder how that happened. Story 20. I was lying down in the bathtub relaxing with my eyes closed, then opened them and my Doberman was just inches from my face, staring at me. She was just checking on me, I guess, but it really startled me. Story 21. I awoke because I heard my closet door creak open, then a child giggling in the pitch-black closet. It turned out that my cat somehow pried the door open, strolled in, and walked on a talking Dr. McStuffins doll that my children had left there for unknown reasons. That is just one of several heart-stopping wake-ups I have had since becoming a mother. Nothing is scarier than your own kids in the middle of the night. Story 22. Tie between one stray cat in my house that we could not see at first, making demon sounds and frightening the dog, or to my dog standing over me with her face directly in my face. Story 23. My sister, who was in total psychosis and did not live with me, stood in my bedroom flat up against the door, blocking my exit, with her hands in her pockets, squinting at me with her head tilted, and refusing to answer me. I had been terrified of her for the last 8 months. She committed suicide on August 14th. Story 24. I woke up to my stepfather's finger in my buttocks. He had torn a hole in my underwear. My little sister and I had bunk beds. As I woke up, he hid under the bed. We both remained silent for a few minutes, which felt like hours. Story 25. When I was in high school, I woke up with my nose hurting. I blew my nose, looked at the tissue, and saw something that looked like a centipede along with some blood. I slept in the living room for about a week after that. Story 26. Someone else's hand next to my head. It was actually my own hand I had slept on, which went numb. Story 27. Not woken up to, but while going to sleep, I clearly heard Binky whispered into my ear. I was alone in the room except for my daughter sleeping in her crib. The voice sounded male and I have no explanation for it. I was instantly awake and remained awake for a good 20 minutes. Half of that time was spent determining if the black coat in my closet was really a coat or maybe an intruder that mysteriously appeared. Story 28. I woke once to the sound of a pack of coyotes making their way past my tent. I'm guessing there were 3 to 5 of them, all jabbering back and forth to each other. It sat me straight up from a sound sleep, and in the couple of seconds it took me to identify what I was hearing and deduce it was no threat. It absolutely froze me. At 3 a.m. on a winter night, in a nylon tent in the middle of nowhere, it sounded very much like the Wild Hunt out stealing souls. Story 29. I woke up once to a black cat on my chest hissing and scratching at my face. I did not live with a cat at the time, Story 30. I once woke up to check my sleep recording application to see if I sleep talked that night. One of the recordings captured someone else talking. It was not the neighbors because it sounded like it was in my room and did not sound like anyone in my family either. It made an unintelligible sound followed by the word us. Story 31. It has been really nice weather around here lately, so we have been sleeping with the windows open to hear the crickets and feel the breeze. 2 nights ago, I was startled awake by a tremendous racket in the backyard. It took me a few seconds to realize that it was a pack of coyotes, less than 100 yards from the house. They were incredibly loud and energetic. They must have been hunting something or had just caught it. There were a lot of them. I had heard them before, far off in the distance, and knew what they sounded like. But to hear them right out in the yard, out of a deep sleep, howling and yipping and cackling like crazy was creepy. Story 32. Woke up dreaming about someone breaking into my house around 4 a.m. I heard my front door code being entered repeatedly. Then I heard pounding and the door handle twisting, trying to be opened. I got out of bed and peered around the corner. A drugged woman was at my front door. She eventually gave up and ran toward the road, waving her arms as a car drove by. I thought I was about to witness her death, but thankfully the car went around her. She wandered off and I never saw her again. I tried going back to sleep after that. Story 33. I hooked up with an ex-coworker I had a crush on, and it was fine until afterwards when he literally stared at me the whole night. He did not look away for 1 second. I was so weirded out that I only got about 2 hours of sleep, and when I woke up, he was still staring at me. I would have left earlier, but the way he was talking before I fell asleep was very strange and possessive. I was scared and did not want to trigger anything in him, to be honest. It was like a switch flipped, and he became a completely different person. I got serial killer vibes. I blocked him and never spoke to him again. Story 34. My college roommate was screaming and a man was hunched over me in my top bunk in our small dorm room. It was the first week of freshman year, and we were drunk and careless. We forgot to lock the door. Kicked him hard, and he climbed back down and left. I filed a police report, and a few days later, a man on our floor told the resident assistant it was him. He said he was sleepwalking, but I think he was just intoxicated. It was a traumatic experience. Story 35. When we were in college, my now husband once acted out the dream he was having and frisked me. He then confidently told me he was at work, as he was a campus security guard, and added an exasperated duh before promptly laying back down and snoring away. He remembered nothing of it. Story 36. Thought my cat's whiskers were tickling my face. No, it was a large spider walking up my cheek. Story 37. I was at my girlfriend's house when I was woken up by her screaming that she did not want me around while holding a butcher knife. I said, "Cindy, what are you doing?" She then came to her senses, as if she was sleepwalking or something. Thank God we were not in a relationship for very long because I ended it after that. Story 38. My mom's best friend was in my bed with me when I was 16. Long story short, I was supposed to stay overnight at my friend's house but decided to come home. They were out drinking, and she was too intoxicated to drive, so my mom told her to stay in my room. Nothing happened other than some embarrassment. Story 39. Oh, I have a good one. A few years ago, I, a woman in my 20s, was drifting comfortably off to sleep in my apartment. Just at the edge of sleep, I heard a sigh and the rustle of sheets behind me on my queen bed, as if someone behind me was settling in for the night. I lived alone. That woke me up pretty quickly. Story 40. The brawny man stood beside my friend's bed. I blinked, and he was gone, but I saw him clearly, beard and all. Story 41. A doll that I thought I threw out is sitting in the doorway watching me sleep. Story 42. My cat was devouring a wild chicken on my blood-covered legs. I turned on my flashlight. She looked up, her entire face covered in blood, eyes reflecting, and she was purring loudly. I was 12. The blanket was soaked in blood. From dead sleep to waking to wet legs, I screamed. Absolute, utter horror. It took more time than it should have to realize what I was looking at. After a while, I realized she had brought me a gift when I learned about cat behavior. Sorry, Sophie, for booting you immediately across the room. Glad you were okay. Story 43. My body was not catching on to the fact that I was awake, and I was still paralyzed for a few seconds. Story 44. I should probably go to the doctor to talk about this. I woke up in my partner's bed about 4 months ago at maybe 3 a.m., completely randomly. Nothing was going on in the room at all, and even the dog was asleep, and he is very sensitive to us moving. I noticed I could feel my pulse through my entire body and very strongly in my chest, like a hard pulsing, not fast at all but enough that I almost felt like my whole body was slightly bouncing up and down. It slowly calmed after a couple of minutes, but it freaked me out. After it stopped, I rolled over, went back to sleep, and did nothing about it. Story 45. My partner was talking in their sleep. I woke up to the murmurs and thought, oh, this should be entertaining. It wasn't at all. The next thing they said was, you need to leave. You need to leave before she comes for you and kills you. I thought they were messing with me until I actually woke them up, and they had no idea what had just happened. I didn't go back to sleep. Story 46. I have 2 stories, but for me, one of the scariest was waking up with a real live bear's snout and teeth about 4 inches from my face. At a previous job, I would sometimes sleep overnight on the back porch, which had a couch on it. This was in the summertime, obviously. I had left a cup of soda and my phone on a table next to me. I woke up all of a sudden with the bear, right next to my face. He had reached for my drink and spilled it on the table. My first instinct was to slowly reach for my phone because I didn't want it to get wet. I am pretty sure the bear had absolutely no idea that I was even there because he jumped back and ran away. The pure terror of waking up to a gaping jaw full of bare teeth is something I will never forget in my life. For the second occasion, it was ghosts. I was at the same place but sleeping inside this time. I was dead asleep until something shocked me awake at around 3 a.m. It was the sound of someone running up the stairs next to me, and it was loud. I lay there silently, frozen in terror. My first thought was that someone had broken in. However, the footsteps stopped right next to me. Then I heard a tapping sound right above my head. I was so scared, I couldn't move a muscle. The next thing that happened was that I felt a tickling sensation on my ear. It kind of felt like a spider crawling on me, so I reached up to see what it was. There was nothing there. Story 47. The sound of a barred owl when I was a child and we had just moved to a house in the woods. Story 48. I woke up to a photograph of myself sent by a former roommate. They showed up at my house, took a picture of me sleeping, then sent it to me and left. We are no longer friends. I also moved out because they put cameras in my room. This incident occurred after I was no longer their roommate. Story 49. Waking up realizing I am still in an apartment on the wrong side of the tracks with nowhere to move to. Having depression, anxiety, and tinnitus. Bored and alone. Story 50. Some guy I had just hooked up with was standing up to pee right off the side of the bed, then lying back down and trying to snuggle me like nothing happened. Story 51. I once woke up to a voice coming from my ceiling calling my name. It has been 5 years, and it still scares me. Story 52. This was shortly after my father passed away. I had just brought his ashes home. I had been watching a show on my computer, then closed it and went to sleep. About 3 hours later, the show started back up, extremely loud. I looked over at my nightstand and saw the light from the computer seeping out along the edges. It was still closed but somehow also playing. I opened the computer, dumbfounded, then immediately thought of my father who loved messing around on computers. I said something like, "Hi, Dad." Then I closed the program, shut the computer, and tried to fall back to sleep. I didn't, not for hours at least. My computer had never done that before or since. I'm sure someone more tech-savvy could explain it, but I honestly don't know how it could have happened. Story 53. I was a patient at a behavioral health center, and we all had our own rooms, but the doors did not lock naturally. I and another patient had our rooms in an empty wing of the center. Everyone else was in the other wing. It was just how the numbers worked out since people were always coming and going. The other patient's room was directly across from mine, and he was a very large man. over 6 feet tall and kind of beefy. He was also living in a different reality than the rest of us, mostly wandering around all day muttering to himself. During the day, he brushed against me as he walked past and thought I was messing with him. I was not, but he thought him bumping into me was me being aggressive towards him. No nurses were around, so I just apologized, and he walked away. I am a tiny person and was not about to get in a fight with him. That night, I woke up to a sound and thought it was a nurse checking on me. They checked our rooms every hour at night and then went back to their monitoring room. I looked over and there was a giant outline of a person in my doorway. It was not the nurse. It was the man across the hall, and my heart jumped in my throat. I just said to him, "What?" And he stood in the doorway for a second while I held my breath. After a moment, he turned around and went back to his room silently. I closed my door and nearly had a heart attack. When the nurse came for her hourly check, I told her about it, and she said, "Okay, we'll keep an eye on him." Nothing happened after that, but I was terrified every night. Story 54. My stalker is in the corner, pulling something attached to himself because my parents let him in. Story 55. Australian here. A giant huntsman spider is staying warm with me in bed. Story 56. A cross falling on my face. The cross from my grandfather's casket. Story 57. In college, I came home for the weekend. That night, I woke up to my cat standing on my chest, breathing in my face. I screamed because she scared me, and she ran away. Took 10 minutes to calm down. Story 58. Circus music blasting through our house speaker at 3 a.m. Story 59. Once, I woke up to the police standing in my bedroom, shining a light in my face and talking to each other. They said the neighbor downstairs complained about the noise. Story 60. When I was around 20, I lived in a small apartment with my then boyfriend. I worked nights, so I was often home alone, sleeping during the day. One of my biggest fears as a small woman was that someone would break in. One day, I experienced sleep paralysis and hallucinated that a man was leaning over me in bed. He was talking to me, but I couldn't understand him. I was terrified, but the worst part was that when I woke up, I found a note from the maintenance man saying he had fixed a leak in my kitchen. It was not a hallucination. Story 61. I fell asleep on my sofa with the lights off because it was still daytime. My right arm was resting against the back of the sofa, holding onto the top for some reason. I woke up hours later in pitch black darkness because it was nighttime. My arm had gone numb from being in that position for hours and it fell onto my face. So here I am, in the dark, hazy and half asleep, suddenly awakened by the slap of a hand I cannot see, feel, or control. Shocked and full of adrenaline, I was ready to fight but couldn't move my arm to grab the random arm, until I realized it was mine. Story 62. Probably a little lame, but waking up after being blackout drunk. When I was in university, I remember getting drunk with a friend and waking up the next morning in bed. I remember the night perfectly but have no recollection of the 20-minute walk home. I got up and checked myself for any injuries, bruises, or if I had lost anything. I was perfectly fine. Story 63. My bathtub faucet was running at full power. The sound of the water woke me. I lay in bed waking up, feeling groggy and confused. I was alone in the house all night. Story 64. The sound of heavy breathing is coming from outside my bedroom window. My bedroom is on the second floor of an old farmhouse in the country. Story 65. I sleepwalk occasionally. Once in college, I woke up standing in the middle of my room holding a knife. Luckily, my boyfriend was not there. Story 66. I woke up to my son shaking me. Apparently, I was singing a very inappropriate song loudly in my sleep. Story 67. Woke up with an odd feeling, and when I did, I felt like there was something circling the ceiling of my room. I say felt because I saw something, but I couldn't quite make it out. It was almost visible but still not, if that makes sense. Story 68. A lit candle guttered, making a small pool of burning wax on the floor beside my head. Story 69. My friend and I went on an adventure trip called the Gibbon Experience in Laos. where you zip line through the jungle and sleep in tree houses high in the jungle canopy. We woke up to tree rats running across our heads. Story 70. My home backs up to a highway with about 1/8 of a mile of land before a large concrete barrier. I have 3 dogs. Otis, a Corgi German Shepherd mix, considers himself the protector of all of us. And to be fair, he is, especially when my female partner is out of town. One night, I woke up to the other 2 dogs shaking and crying, which is very abnormal. Otis was barking like I had never heard before. Seconds later, I heard what sounded like a woman screaming for help. I grabbed my flashlight, my running knife, put Otis on a leash, and we rushed out the door while I called emergency services. The screaming continued, and then it sounded like another woman screaming. 2 different women screaming was too much for me, so Otis and I hurried back to our home while I spoke with the dispatcher. Police arrived within 10 minutes to search for the screaming women. We all heard the sounds at the same time, and one officer from the area laughed. The other officers, and Otis, who takes himself very seriously, were upset. This was not a joke. Have you ever heard a fox bark? It sounds like a woman in distress. There was a fox den behind my house in that 1/8 of a mile of land. Story 71. An insect, a cockroach, is next to my bed on the floor, just watching me. I don't know how long it has been beside my bed. Story 72. Woke up at a friend's house and I couldn't move. It was not sleep paralysis, just partied way too hard. Story 73. When I was a little girl, there was an elderly woman with Alzheimer's disease who lived on the block. When I woke up, she was in my bedroom. Story 74. Not knowing where I was after waking up from a coma lasting a week. I thought for sure I was at the hospital where I was born instead of the one near our house. Took a minute to realize otherwise. Story 75. Once I was staying at a friend's house, and this girl was there for the evening when we had a barbecue dinner. I had never met her before that night. Anyway, I fell asleep on the couch and woke up because something was digging into my back. It was that girl's camera that she had forgotten. She must have lost it in the couch. My curiosity got the better of me, and I started scrolling through her photos. There were literally thousands of photos of me from that night, just being myself and visiting with my friends. That person secretly took thousands of photos of me. I was really creeped out. Story 76. Back when I was part of a really fun theater group, after rehearsal and set work one night, we all just ordered pizzas and relaxed around the theater. I ended up on one of the sofas, and I woke up at some point to the tech guy kneeling down and stroking hair from my face. I opened my eyes, and he was taken by surprise and left, as I rolled over and pretended to still be asleep. He was a friend, but not a close friend, and I wondered why anyone would do that. Soon after, one day he was giving me a ride, and I said, I had the weirdest dream that night we all crashed at the theater. I woke up and you were stroking my hair. The look on his face was horrified, and he just said, yeah, that's totally weird. Or maybe the time I was working at Lollapalooza with my best friend at the time, and I woke up in the middle of the night to her loudly with Jason McHugh in the other bed in our hotel room. Jason McHugh is a producer, friend of Trey Parker and Matt Stone, played Miller in Cannibal, the musical, and is also the character Jason in South Park. Story 77. I used to date a really cute redhead. One day, she let herself in, and I woke up in bed to her straddling me while wearing just her underwear and my old roommate's latex Ronald Reagan mask he must have left in a closet. I actually gasped and pushed out my arms as she started laughing. Story 78. Hearing my own voice say my name clear as day. I woke up with a confused sense of urgency for nothing. Super bizarre. That house was definitely haunted. Story 79. About 2002, my first wife woke me up saying someone was knocking at the door. It was maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. Our spare room overlooked the front door. I went in there and opened the bedroom window. At my door was an older man, maybe in his 70s, and a young girl around 18 years old. She was holding a baby. I asked them what they wanted. They both just looked up at me, turned, and walked back up my driveway. I asked if they had the wrong house. They said nothing, not a word. I watched them walk down the street. I lived in a small village in the United Kingdom at the time. It was most probably a mistake, but it freaked me out. Story 80. I was in bed reading close to the window with my boyfriend next to me. It was in the woods, and I realized I was hearing footsteps, as quiet as possible in the falling leaves, creeping toward the open window. I quietly woke my boyfriend. He grabbed his shotgun, chambered it, and pointed it out the window. The most silent yet effective conversation I have ever had with a stranger. I still sleep with windows and occasionally doors open, but now I have a big guard dog in my bed. Story 81. A person-shaped shadow loomed across the bedroom door. I sat up and said, "Hello!" In my sleepiest, most confused voice. The shadow disappeared. Then my husband jumped out of bed to see a car speeding away. Don't worry, we changed the locks the next day. Story 82. My former partner sat bolt upright beside me in bed, staring at me in utter bewilderment and fear, holding a pair of scissors in a threatening manner. He had no idea who I was or where he was. It was genuinely touch and go for a few minutes. I fully expected to be stabbed. However, by staying calm and speaking slowly and softly, I managed to relieve him of the scissors. He soon went back to sleep and woke up in the morning with absolutely no memory of what had happened. As for me, I did not sleep much for the rest of that night. Story 83. We were house-sitting for some friends, sound asleep, when we woke up to a loud bang followed by maniacal laughter that kept repeating. We opened our door to find that the cats had knocked an old Halloween decoration, which was in a bag, off the shelf. It was a fake phone that emitted an evil laugh when lifted from the cradle. I could not sleep for the rest of the night. Our friends thought it was hilarious when we told them what happened. They were also grateful to the cats for finding it, as they could not remember where it was. Story 84. A gigantic Argiope spider turned out to be on the outside of the window, not inside the house with me. A few months after the spider appeared, I woke up because a loblolly pine fell onto my roof right over my room and caused the ceiling to collapse onto my bed. I was lucky the walls caught the tree, and it did not come all the way down and crush me. But honestly, the large spider was scarier in the moment. Story 85. Very loud feedback sound on the living room stereo system. I have never found out what caused it to this day. I had to get up and manually unplug everything from the wall. Story 86. My oldest son, 37 years old now, used to just stand by the side of my bed and stare rather than wake me. The mother in me would sense him there, yet I would jump. Funny now. Story 87. Some disturbed person who did not speak English stood over me muttering and staring with intense eyes. It never made sense to me to have to share a room with someone in a psychiatric ward. Story 88. When I was pregnant and my husband was out of town, I woke up and thought there was a man standing over my bed about to smother me with a pillow. I screamed and kicked my legs to fight him off. My poor dog was terrified and I had accidentally kicked her. I felt so bad. There was no man there. It was just an incredibly realistic hallucination. It took me hours to calm down and weeks to recover. Story 89-1. As a young child, I had chronic bloody noses. While I do not remember waking up to this, my mother does. I was napping, and when my mother came to get me, I had a bloody nose all over the bed. A fly had laid eggs in the blood right next to my face. 2. In college, I rescued a female rat from a laboratory that only conducted research on males. One night, I woke up to find my adored pet rat crawling on me in bed. Sadly, in my sleep stupor, I threw her. Fortunately, she was fine and lived a full life. Story 90. Dang, I guess I got off easy. The creepiest thing I woke up to was my dad in a gorilla mask right in my face. Story 91. I was 18 and working third shift. I came home and went straight to bed. I woke up with a terrible headache after sleeping 6 hours to the fire alarm going off. I couldn't get it to stop, so I called the fire department. When tested for carbon monoxide, they said it was so strong they could not believe I woke up at all. Firefighters, emergency medical services, and the emergency room doctor all made different comments that I should not have been alive. It had been a bad leak, and I had symptoms of severe carbon monoxide poisoning. I don't know what woke me up and saved me. It definitely wasn't the alarm. It wasn't loud at all, and it took me a bit to even realize it was alarming. I can sleep through a literal tornado, dogs barking next to me on the bed. I'm a heavy sleeper. This is something I think about often when I go to bed, as I'm still a deep sleeper when I can actually sleep. I wasn't aware of how seriously fatal carbon monoxide could be until that day. Story 92. I once dated an absolutely horrible human being for a few years. Early in our relationship, I awoke to him taking a picture of me sleeping with his genitalia in his hand, clearly visible in the foreground. I must have felt his presence because I woke up right as he was doing it. He, of course, played it off as a joke and said I was strange for finding it weird. Eventually, I put many things together and realized I was dating a literal textbook covert narcissist with sociopathic tendencies, so I left him. Fast forward to a few years later, I recently found out he was posted on one of those "Are we dating the same guy" Facebook pages. Hundreds of his ex-partners came forward with warnings and horror stories. These included secretly recording them via house cameras and smart glasses, knowingly passing sexually transmitted diseases, and falsely claiming he had a stroke at work. In fact, he passed out due to a combination of street methamphetamine, according to his blood test. This led to him losing his job as a nurse when the incident happened during a hospital shift. The silver lining is I've become good friends with a few of the women he was cheating on me with, which has been both entertaining and validating after going through such a toxic relationship. I believe in karma and hope that soon, he receives everything he deserves. Story 93. My abusive ex was standing over me, watching me sleep. I had moved away from him and returned to my family home. He was not supposed to be there, and our baby son was asleep nearby. A friend changed the locks the next day. Story 94. My sibling and I went for a few-mile hike through a forest that led to a beach. We were tent camping overnight and spent some time deciding where to put the tent. At the edge of the forest, there was a small drop-off, approximately 5 feet high, followed by a rocky area and then a beautiful sandy beach. The tide was very far out. We considered placing the tent on the sand for comfort, but decided to place it just on the edge of the drop-off because deer were all over the beach and it was a better viewpoint. In the middle of the night, we both woke up to the sound of waves crashing against the small cliff. We could have been swept out into the ocean while zipped not only inside the tent but also in our sleeping bags. We were young. Story 95. I was home alone and heard a sudden loud knocking on the locked bedroom door at 3 a.m. Dream? Hallucination. Polite murderer. I was wide awake in a second and frozen in fear. When I gathered my wits, I checked my living room pet camera and saw nothing but sleeping cats. I got up and checked the whole house with a knife and all lights blazing. It is exploding head syndrome, sudden loud auditory hallucinations in the middle of sleeping. It has happened a couple of other times, but that was terrifying. It usually happens during stressful periods, which fits my experience. Story 96. I was in the hospital hallway, waiting to be seen by a psychiatrist. My parents were at work, so it was just me there. I was sleeping to make the time go by faster. I am a light sleeper in the hospital, so I always wake up when someone comes near my bed. I sensed someone near my bed, so I sat up and looked over. A man was standing there staring at me. I admit I was afraid because earlier he had been yelling and throwing things, and I thought he was going to attack me. Story 97. One morning, I was peacefully sleeping in my bedroom. It was nearly pitch black in the room from wonderful blackout curtains, so I was in a really deep sleep. Suddenly, I was abruptly awoken by a loud thump on my door, which then swung open forcefully. I didn't have a doorknob, so you had to use some force to open it. I am also visually impaired, so imagine my horror as something big and dark groaned my name and started crawling into my bedroom. Somehow, I did not panic. It was, in fact, my poor mother suffering from a migraine and unable to walk. She was trying to inform me that she was staying home. Story 98. I had a dream where I felt a heavy weight pushing down on my chest, causing me to breathe heavily. I woke up to our cat sitting on my chest, staring straight into my face and soul from a couple of inches away. Story 99. My mom said my dad was probably dead. I went down to check and he was. Story 100. I went through my entire morning routine, heard the normal sounds, smelled the normal smells, and rode the train into work. I nearly reached the office. Then I woke up and spent the next 2 hours in déjà vu. Story 101. Severed pigeon head on the floor at the other side of the room. Story 102. My Alexa went off and started talking in the middle of the night. Story 103. Woke up just fine and was heading to the kitchen to make some coffee, wearing a loose top that barely covered me when I saw a figure seated on my couch. A handsome man dressed all in black was sitting there with his feet stretched out on my footrest and his coat next to him. He was smoking, and at first I thought the cigar smell was mine from last night. The strangest part was that I didn't even have a reaction. I said good morning, went back to get dressed, and made coffee for both of us so we could talk. Now he was looking at me strangely, as if I were the one who showed up at his place. Story 104. I was probably bitten on the neck by a large insect. Reactively, I grabbed it and threw it as hard as I could. I could not find it after I turned on the light. I think it was a giant spider. Story 105. My wife is screaming. It is nightmare-related. This has happened a dozen times in 40 years together. It is not frequent but unnerving. Story 106. I woke up to find a light blue virtual reality-like grid in my vision. It disappeared after a few seconds, but it was strange. It has happened several times before and still occurs occasionally today, but it does not really freak me out. I have some bad migraines that affect my vision, so I convinced myself it is related. Story 107. A fire alarm sounded in a hotel room. When I got out of bed to investigate, my feet landed in an inch of water on the floor. Story 108. A palm-sized huntsman spider was directly above me in bed. These spiders are not native to my area, and I have not seen another since. I ducked under the covers and left the room until the next day. The spider was still there, so I killed it with bug spray. Story 109. Sound of a massive number of fire trucks. A woman in my old neighborhood was upset about her situation in life, so she decided to burn down the house where she lived, a house that included her father, stepmother, and 4 children. 4 firefighters went inside after the family got out, and the floor collapsed. 2 died immediately, 1 died about 3 months later, and the other survived. It is a creepy feeling knowing she was so casual about burning down a house full of people. Story 110. My husband suddenly sat up, which woke me. He looked in the corner near the ceiling and loudly said, "The spider! The spider!" Then he fell back and immediately fell asleep. He did not remember in the morning. Story 111. Just last week, my friends and I got pretty drunk on a camping trip. Someone much smarter than me set up an inflatable couch, and I ended up passing out on it for a while. I woke up around 3 or 4 in the morning, completely alone in the pitch black. There was just a small, dying camp lantern providing enough light to see the trees around me, but absolute darkness beyond that. I was in no danger, easily knew the way back, and people were nearby I could call out to. I also hadn't drunk enough to worry about aspirating vomit, so I didn't mind them going to bed. That walk back to the open cabin was one of the scariest feelings. It was incredibly dark and quiet. Not a single sound. Just pitch-black darkness beyond the lantern's small light and sheer silence, except for my own footsteps. If something had made a sound or a branch broke, I probably would have died on the spot. Plus, the cabin didn't have a front, just 3 sides with bunk beds and a roof. If something followed me, there was no hiding in a tent. Story 112. My 3-year-old's face was 6 inches away from mine, whispering "Daddy" at 3 a.m. Story 113. My husband and I were going to a lake house to stay with my parents, grandparents, aunt, and uncle. We were originally supposed to have our own room, but things changed when my aunt threw a fit. She and my uncle canceled their hotel room and decided to stay at the house instead. My husband and I ended up sleeping on an air mattress in the living room. No big deal, we were young. We woke up at about 4:30 in the morning to my grandparents sitting at the kitchen table, about 5 feet from our bed, drinking their coffee and watching us like we were zoo animals. Then my grandpa said, "Look at the feet on that guy." My husband is 6 feet 5 inches tall and wears size 16 shoes, so yes, he has very large feet. But the whole thing was strange and unnerving, knowing they were just watching us sleep, Luckily, that was the last night we were there, and we headed home later that day. Story 114. For me, it was my child sitting straight up in bed, laughing the hardest laugh I have ever heard, completely asleep in a dark room. I also think how strange it must be for infants and young children to fall asleep in a car seat in one place, then wake up somewhere totally different. Story 115. When I was a child, my aunt went on a trip to Hawaii and brought back these battery-powered dancing hula dolls for me and my sister. They sat on top of a very tall bookshelf in our room for years without anyone touching them. One night, one of them suddenly started moving wildly at about 3 or 4 in the morning, dancing and playing hula music. We threw them away after that. Story 116. I grew up in a house that was haunted. My sister and I always felt a constant dread and uneasiness. I saw a ghost. Years later, my honest dad confessed that he had experienced things too. One morning, I woke up and couldn't breathe, as if something was suffocating me. I got up and looked in the mirror, but nothing was out of the ordinary. It lasted about 30 seconds and had not happened before or since. Story 117. I fell asleep mildly drunk on the couch bed of my tiny flophouse room. I woke up extremely fuzzy-brained 2 to 3 hours later to a sound like someone crumpling a paper bag. Despite the paper-thin walls, I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Every direction I turned my head, it was equally loud. Eventually, I realized the sound was coming from inside my ear. A cockroach had crawled in there while I slept. This was followed by a scalding hot shower and a lot of panicked head shaking and jumping up and down. At some point, I passed out. When I woke up again, it was gone. Thank God, because I couldn't have afforded a doctor visit to remove it. Story 118. Okay, I'm gonna tell something I shouldn't. I rolled over waking up one morning. My old pit bull always sleeps beside me. Half asleep, with my eyes still closed, I reached out to give her a pat to wake her up. Instead, I stuck my finger right into her eye. I got her good. I thought I had blinded her. I opened my eyes. Scared to death I had hurt her badly, but her butt was staring back at me. Yet, she lifted her head and looked at me like, really? I jumped up and ran to the bathroom. That was 2 years ago, and my fingertip is still sore from the scrubbing it got. Story 119. My child was standing over me like the girl from The Ring. Then she vomited on my bed. She is a lovely adult now and no longer frightens people awake. Story 120. My child's cold fingers wrapped around my ankle, which I had left hanging out of the blanket after she had been asleep for at least 2 hours. She's lucky I don't kick when I'm surprised. Another time, I was right on the edge of falling asleep when my husband suddenly shot up and started swiping his arms like something was on them. When I asked him if he was okay, he stopped, looked me in the eyes and said, "It's not nice to throw boxes of spiders at people." Then he went back to sleep. He has also told me while he was asleep that I am not allowed to sell our child, which was sweet. He also grabbed me and told me, "They're here and you need to take our baby and run." He rolled over and went back to sleep. He's something else. Story 121. My 3-year-old son, sleeping next to me in my bed, had a nosebleed while he was sleeping. I woke up to find his entire face covered in blood. He was fine, but I was very scared. Story 122. At 18 or 19, I woke in the middle of the night to find my stepfather standing in my doorway, watching me sleep. My little sister was sleeping in my room with me. Years later, I learned he had been after her. It never occurred to me that a grown man could desire a child. He is now serving time in prison. Story 123. My dog, Friendly, was growling. I nudged him because I thought he was dreaming. I picked my head up to see my ex-husband standing over me at 4 a.m. He wanted to talk. He said, "You'd better get that dog." I replied, "No, you'd better get out of here." He left. He will forever be my favorite dog. Story 124. When I was a child, I woke up to a mouse chewing on the corner of the mattress I was sleeping on. I ran to my parents' room and told them what I saw, as we had previous problems with mice in the house. When we returned to my bed, there was no mouse or any sign of damage to the mattress or sheet. My parents were rightfully annoyed, thinking I was lying or had just had a bad dream. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.